All right, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Teardown. My name is Jeff Gluck. I'm along with my coworker, Jordan Bianchi. We are motorsports writers for The Athletic, and we are continuing to recap the recently completed NASCAR Cup Series season. We are a couple weeks into the offseason now, although it's sort of like week one for us, Jordan, since we were in Vegas, and that took a toll more than most of all the NASCAR races that I went to this year, schedule wise, at least. But
Have you recovered?
I think I barely. I was sleeping hard this week, catching up, and my body was like, "What did you just put me through?" Practices till 4 a.m, all this kind of stuff. So that was. I'm glad to have that one behind us. And actually, we just this morning, as we record this, the F1 season wrapped up with yet another Max Verstappen win. 19 wins this year out of the 22 races. Including 17 out of the last 18, and Red Bull wins 20 of the 21 races. Fortunately, NASCAR was a lot more competitive this year among the teams, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to go team by team and evaluate how they did this year. So are you ready to dive into it, Jordan? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It feels like Phoenix in the NASCAR season was completed like 6 weeks ago. It feels a long way away for me. It doesn't feel like it was just a few weeks ago at all. But yeah, I mean, looking back, it's we're gonna go through some numbers that you put together, and it's like, wow, okay. It's pretty remarkable. We're gonna talk kind of organization by organization a little bit, and it's remarkable how the perception of some organizations are maybe a little bit skewed one way or another. And it's going to be interesting to see what you think about that and what we think about the totality of the season in terms of these organizations, because even within some of these teams, there was a lot of juxtapositions of guys who did really well and then other guys who frankly didn't do well. And it really wasn't like a lot of these organizations, it wasn't like, oh, they just had a down year. It was like, no, within that organization, somebody had hit it on it and someone didn't.
Yeah, and look, in today's racing climate, I think whether it's F1 or NASCAR now, especially with the most equal cars we've ever seen across the field, the best way to judge a driver's performance in a lot of cases is looking at how they did in comparison to their teammates. So we'll go dive into that here. So the way we're going to do this is we'll start with the lead driver in the standings. This doesn't mean this was the top team, essentially, right? Because we're not going to say that Team Penske was the best team of the year, but Ryan Blaney did win the championship for Team Penske. So that is where we will start. Ryan Blaney, obviously, first in points. His average finish, obviously, we've talked about it, not what it was, compared to some of the other top drivers, 14.1. But clearly was the standout on his team. Joey Logano ended up finishing 12th in points, 14.9 average finish. Austin Cindric all the way down in 24th in points. Yikes. 21.6. Not a good follow-up for him. So obviously, we talked a lot about Blaney, but got hot at the right time. You don't hold that against them, but I also, it's like I wrote about this on The Athletic this week about NASCAR had their fan choice awards, and the fans named Jonathan Hassler as the crew chief of the year, and I was like, nah, I don't agree with that. I'm sorry.
No.
Crew chief, look, he helped Blaney at the right time get hot. They executed perfectly. They deserved the championship at the end of the season, but crew chief of the year,
no way.
No.
Like that to me is a no-brainer. I don't know how you feel about this, but to me, that's Rudy Fugle.
That's who I picked, Rudy Fugle.
Yeah,
Byron led in wins,
yeah,
top fives, top tens.
Mm-hmm.
He was average finish and second in laps led.
Yeah, and I mean, he's my driver of the year too.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you've voted that, but to me, we've talked about this. I kind of feel we do this year-end show. Is like you have to separate the champion from the driver of the year, because it's no longer one and the same. And while Blaney is a worthy champion, and like Byron for the totality of his season, all 36 races, like he's the guy. Like, and I don't even think it's that close. I mean, I think Larson's number 2, but I think there's a pretty good gap there between them. And yeah, I don't know how you don't vote what Rudy did with that team and really with the steps they took. That surprises me.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's the fan choice awards. They can vote for whoever they want, but you know, we can agree to disagree there. So Logano, you know, he was hoping to have the playoffs that Blaney did. Ended up not being able to do that, and 12th in points for him is that's not what you're looking for coming off a championship season. You know, I don't really know what to make of his year. You know, he did win a race, but 12th in points for him is the lowest since 2017, when he finished 17th in points, missed the playoffs. His average finish was his lowest since that year as well. So it just wasn't the year he's really looking for. Interestingly enough, Jordan, Logano ends up with the exact same amount of top fives and top tens that he had last year, just with 3 less wins and 1 less championship. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure he's looking for a rebound next year.
Yeah, and you've compared his stats to Ryan Blaney's, they're not too dissimilar. I mean, the wins is the one that really jumps out to you, and that was the difference. Is Logano last year was able to overcome the deficiencies they had. They hit on something come the playoffs, and this year they weren't able to do that. The team that hit on it was the 12 team in the Penske group, not the 22. And it's overall, they really were a victim of the Ford struggles this year, you know, finding consistency on intermediate tracks a little bit. And it wasn't there for them. And it's, you know, this feels like I was kind of looking at the numbers a little bit. We haven't had a monster Joey Logano season in a while. And that says that's really weird because he just won the championship last year. And again, you kind of you got to look at it differently. But when have we had the last time when Joey Logano, you know, was leading the series in wins and laps led, or one of the series leaders? And it's been a while now. There's something to be said for the fact that he goes out, wins races every year, and is in contention, and he's one of those guys you just kind of know is going to be in the mix. But it just feels like this team isn't to where they haven't leveled up to where they should be at on a consistency basis, and that continued this year a little bit. There was glimmers of it during the beginning of the year, but overall, it just wasn't there for them the way they needed it to be.
So the other member of that team, Austin Cindric, disappointing sophomore season for him after he obviously won the Daytona 500 last year. His average finish declines by more than 5 spots.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, you're not only just not sort of seeing progress, but going backwards, it felt like.
Backwards.
And he also only had 20 lead lap finishes, which only 3 full-time Cup drivers had fewer than that amount of lead lap finishes. So that's not what he's looking for. However, you know, he did feel like, you know, talking to him at Phoenix, he made some progress toward the end of the year. They felt like they were going in a better direction, but 24th in points as your teammate wins the championship is not something that is going to be sustainable for him.
No, and what Austin did last year in his rookie year, and I think people overlook this, is he had a really, really great, consistent rookie year. And even the Daytona 500 win aside, like week in and week out, he was running in the top 15. Points wise, he was in a good position. This year, they weren't able to do it. And we've talked a lot about the Ford problems and everything, and that's fine. But that doesn't excuse you can still run well on super speedways, and you should still be able to muster good, consistent finishes on road courses. And I know he had a few top 10s this year. Coda, and in Chicago, for example. But you expect more out of him on these road courses, right? You expect to see him be like an AJ Allmendinger, who, even though AJ's with a team that isn't to the level they need to be at, still goes out and performs and gets a win. There's no reason that Austin Cindric can't do that on road courses, even with all of the other issues, and it just wasn't there for him this year. There's no way to look at it other than that this was a really disappointing year. And while he is certainly not in a dry, I don't want to look, we're not trying to look too far ahead of 2024 here, but he is certainly somebody that you look at in the next season, like you expect more out of him, and you need to see more out of him.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next team in the standings, which would be Hendrick Motorsports. Their drivers finished 2nd and 3rd in points, and then 2 of their drivers obviously missed the playoffs. You know,
and went winless. That's the thing. Like,
that's true. Yeah, their other 2 drivers went winless. Yeah, that is a big one. And it's not like, I mean, you know, yes, Elliott missed 7 races, but he was still there for 29 races and didn't win. Bowman was still there for 33 races and didn't win. And the disparity within the team there is pretty big for a top team. I mean, again, we talked about Byron, leads the series in average finish with an 11.0. Bowman's average finish was 17.2. And that's just not gonna cut it there. Elliott actually had a better average finish by a position and a half than Larson. Elliott was 13.1 average finish, just couldn't get the wins. But Larson and Byron tied for the series lead in top fives, and then Larson led the series in laps led, and Byron was second. So those were the two, top teams easily at Hendrick. Elliott was really optimistic though at Phoenix, at least going into that race, where he talked about he felt like he was in a much better position leaving this season than they were last year, even though he had a successful year last year, so to speak. So he's hopeful to obviously turn things around. But Bowman, you could look at his back and all that stuff, probably affected him, but he's really got to make some gains next year for sure.
Yeah, Hendrick to me is the hardest team to gauge because there's such a gap there between what Byron and Kyle Larson were able to do. Not, amid the wins and everything else, but the consistency. I mean, arguably the 5 and the 24 were the two most consistent teams this year. Or at least they're, if you want to throw Denny Hamlin in that mix, they're two of the 3 most, right? And maybe the 19. And what they were able to do on a weekly basis, regardless of the track, was impressive. And that's great. And they almost won the championship. But then you look at what Elliott did, and Elliott was really good. Like his average finish is really impressive, but he didn't win. And the most laps he led in a race this year were 83 at Martinsville in the fall. That jumped out to me, was that this team, while they were finishing races well, they weren't running races well. They weren't putting them in a position to get stage points. They weren't leading a bunch of laps. They weren't a fixture up front. They were start off races kind of out of the ballpark a little bit and then have to make that car better. I mean, how many times this year did we see Chase Elliott go to a race, qualify well, win, be in the mix to win stages, get a bunch of stage points, and be in the mix at the end of the race? It didn't happen too often this year. I'm kind of in the camp of just chalking up. It was just one of those years. Everything that could go wrong for the 9 team, it went wrong, and they still, at the end of the day, they still made the most of it, and they still had a really good average finish, and it is what it is, and you'll learn from this. And Ryan Blaney's a perfect example of you don't necessarily need to pull the alarm bell because you can go from being winless to a champion, and the everything is there. But they need to figure out what is missing though, because this isn't just a 2023 thing. This goes back further than that to even 2022, when their last win, if you would say on a natural track, came at Nashville. In June of that year, because Pocono was handed to them because of the DQ, and then they won a race at Talladega, which is a super speedway. That's a long stretch for this team, and there's other underlining issues there. I'm not concerned about it, but I'm curious about it. It makes me raise my eyebrow, and they need to figure that out this offseason. But I think their average finish is proof, an indication that they're in a good spot at least, and the foundation is there, and they're going to be okay. Bowman, I'm not sure what to make of Bowman's season. It's like a tale of 2 seasons, right? Because if you look at pre-injury, he was leading the point standings. He had the best average finish. Like he looked like, wow, this is Alex Bowman kind of really coming into his own and making that big step we kind of were looking for him to make. And then he gets hurt. Then you get the penalty and everything else. And he was not that same. The team was not the same. And so you almost kind of want to write it off and say, listen, that back injury, we've heard other drivers who've had it have said it impacts you more than you know. You lose the feel, your sensation of how the race car is supposed to handle. And I get that. Hendrick, when Bowman did come back, was not the same organization either. They weren't the world beaters. That said, though, the 5 and the 24 still figured it out, and the 48 didn't. I don't know. This is a team that I'm glad we're not putting letter grades on them, because I would have to think long and hard of what letter grade to give. It's almost like you have to give 2 different grades.
Interesting Chase Elliott stat before we wrap up that conversation. So he had 7 top 5s in 29 races. So how many more, if let's say he had run those other 7 races, Jordan, how many more top fives would he have gotten out of those 7 races that he ran? Maybe
Two,
2 or
three.
3. Okay, right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. So even if he had 2 or 3 more top fives, it is still the lowest number of his career. His rookie season,
Yeah.
he had 10 top fives. That is the lowest number of his career. However, the top tens, he had 15 top tens. So let's say he runs 7 more races or whatever. Maybe he gets 5 of those are top tens,
Yeah.
let's say. Okay. Well, that puts him right about where he has been in top tens. So it's like he had the top 10 speed, but not the top 5 and not the winning speed. So, they were probably a 6th to 10th place team a lot of weeks. That's kind of what that tells me. I feel like.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair. And it's just they just were missing that last little bit to elevate them from that fifth, sixth range to being a bona fide title contender. Um, I think they're going to be fine. It'll be interesting. The spotlight's going to be on Gustafson next year, which is going to be interesting to see how that all unfolds.
Our next team is Joe Gibbs Racing. They had 1 driver make the championship 4 after it looked like for a while. Hey, could they have like 3? I mean, the 2 drivers out of that we thought was going to make the championship 4 that were, we were the most sure about didn't make it. Christopher Bell ended up making it. However, when you look at Christopher Bell's stats, his stats weren't as good as Denny Hamlin's. I mean, Denny Hamlin had 1 more win than Bell. He had 4 more top fives. He had the same number of top tens. He led way more laps and he had a better average.
400 more laps. Yep.
Yep. So, Truex, obviously we talked at length about the way he completely dropped off. He only finished his 11th in points after winning the regular season title, which is just a stunning drop off. He had 2 completely different seasons. And then you have, I think you could say you mentioned earlier Larson was sort of the second best of the year. You could make an argument for Hamlin being in that conversation. And then Ty Gibbs. I mean, again, for a rookie, that was really, that's a really good season, really solid season. 18th in points. The next best driver aside from Chase Elliott to not make the playoffs. He had 4 top fives, 10 top tens. He had that great Bristol performance. So if he's not a rookie, he's probably in the playoffs, putting together much better results. But overall, I think, hey, I mean, you can make an argument here for Joe Gibbs as the best team of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, overall, absolutely. I mean, Martin Truex Jr. wins the regular season title. Hamlin is one of the most consistent teams all season long. Bell is kind of a weird thing to kind of look at because at one point he was the points leader during the regular season and then kind of fell off. We didn't get that breakout year I think we were expecting from him. But then again, come the playoffs, he makes a championship 4, so it's hard to be too critical there. And Ty Gibbs was really impressive. He's everything what you want to see out of a rookie. Got continually better as the year went along. Didn't make a ton of mistakes. And the big thing with Ty this year was he wasn't really involved in any of the extracurricular stuff. We talked a lot about the maturity issues with him, how he was going to able to adapt to running, in the Cup Series full time, and was he going to be able to, keep his temper and all these other things in check. And largely, yeah, there's some moments here and there, but he did a really good job of that. And I think what Toyota did this year with him and how they kind of and Joe Gibbs and how they helped Ty put him in a position to be successful, it showed and it worked. And now he's going to have to continue to make that steps. It's hard not to think that Joe Gibbs Racing is the team of the year overall when you look at all 4 of these teams, because 3 of the 4 won. Ty Gibbs was a rookie, so you kind of give him a free pass there. The 5 and the 19 and the 11 were in they're another level this year. The 20 was in the mix. They were really good, and you almost to the point of you almost feel like they kind of let the championship get away from them a little bit. Like if Denny would have gotten to Phoenix, maybe he would have been in that. He would have had a shot to win it. And certainly the way the playoffs unfolded for Truex, that's going to be hard to swallow, and it's hard not to think that they really let one get away. Not saying they're going to win the championship, but just at least be in the conversation. And they never really were. It was always they're on their back foot scrambling. But overall, I think they have a lot to be happy about. And I would even say they left probably some wins on the table too. They both Denny all three of those four drivers won multiple races, and you could argue that they probably should have won more.
Hendrick has a lower or worse average finish by a little bit than JGR, but Hendrick did win 2 more races than JGR. It's weird to see a team lead in wins with only 10 wins, where wasn't it, didn't somebody win, what, 18, 19 a couple years ago?
Joe Gibbs not too long ago. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but yeah.
Yeah, they won more than half the races in the season, didn't they? One of those years?
Yeah, I think that was what, 2019 thereabouts.
So then it's off to 2311, which you wouldn't think would be the next team on this list, except that Tyler Reddick just had a really great playoffs after we didn't trust him at all during the regular season. So many mistakes. Then they were able to put it together, finished 6th in points. He ends up with a 15.7 average finish, and Bubba ends up top 10 in points as well, with a 15.9 average finish. So they actually ran, they have very similar stats in some ways. Obviously Reddick won a couple races. And then
4 top 5s too.
Yeah, he doubled the number of top 5s as Bubba. But when you look at it as a whole, you say, hey, 2311 gets both cars into the top 10 in points, both cars in the playoffs. It's like, okay, well, as a taking a step back, you're like, well, it's not, for a team that's still building, that's fairly decent. I mean, I would think.
I was really impressed what I saw out of 2311 this year. This is a team that is trying to make strides. And if you compare them to other new teams kind of in that same ilk, right? The Colleagues of the world, the Trackhouse of the world, those other two organizations either kind of plateaued or took a step back, and 2311 went forward. And what Reddick did speaks for itself. 2 wins this year, deep playoff run, really showed why I think we all agree that he's got championship level talent. And if 2311 can continue to grow, there's an opportunity there for him to become an elite level driver. I was impressed with him. And I think that team, despite leaving a lot of points and a lot of wins on the table, they have a lot to be proud of this year. And I think going through that is going to help them going forward a little bit too, and saying, hey, listen, we get our ducks in a row and we stop shooting ourselves on the foot. We can do a lot of great things here. And I'll say this, I thought Bubba Wallace was really impressive this year. He really matured into a well-rounded driver. This isn't a driver who's just really good on a handful of racetracks. This is a guy who largely week in and week out, and I'll even throw road courses in there, you can kind of count on him to be good. And you knew that he was going to have an opportunity to finish in the top 10. The one caveat, of course, is the top 5s. Reddick doubled that up in the top 5s, and the 23 team did not do a good job of finishing races. They did a good job of running well in races. They did a great job of getting stage points. They did not finish races well. They often would backslide a little bit. They couldn't always keep up with the racetrack, and that hurt them a little bit. And then the lack of wins. It's the consistency was there from this team. They maybe should have won some races this year. Talladega comes to mind. They were in the mix of Kansas, Texas. You got to win. The speed was there. You got to figure out a way to get to the victory lane. And that's what this team needs to do next, is not just win a race. They need to win multiple races, but really overall for 2311, this to me was probably the most overall impressive organization from top to bottom, considering what they did.
So here's a crazy stat for you. So obviously, as we're doing this podcast, by the way, we're constantly looking at Racing Reference, the best
website out there.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know what I'd do without it.
As I pull up Tyler Reddick's career stats and Bubba Wallace's career stats to compare how they did to last year, year over year, all this stuff, right? I noticed this. Last year, both Reddick and Bubba had only 19 lead lap finishes. This year, they both had 28 lead lap finishes. They both had the exact same number year to year and the exact same gain. They both had 9 more lead lap finishes than they did last year. So they took a lot more, they probably reduced their mistakes a lot, right?
Yep.
And they also had very, very, very consistent years. Now, obviously, Bubba's was at the same team, right? But he had both last year and this year, 5 top 5s, 10 top 10s. But his average finish jumped up a lot. And part of that is more lead lap finishes, more finishing races, less DNFs. Reddick obviously went from RCR to 2311, but he had the exact same number of top fives. He had one more top 10, and his average finish went up by 2 spots, again, because he finished more races, had 5 fewer DNFs than last year. So, you know, that's a sign of maturity, I think, when you're probably taking what it gives you more than trying to press at times, or, you know, launch yourself into mistakes. And if they can get their, you know, speed to continue to improve, I think 23:11 should be in a good spot based on what I'm seeing there with those stats. Let's talk about RFK. What a big jump that team took this year.
Wow. Did anybody see this coming, by the way?
Well, I picked them as my most disappointing team going into the
I
year.
forgot about that.
So
the answer's no for you then.
I
Okay.
obviously did not see that coming. They end up finishing 7th and 8th in points. And despite you thinking, well, they pretty much ran together all year. And again, even the 7th and 8th in points would indicate that. But Buescher had a decisively better season, let alone the three wins to 0 with Keselowski. But he had 2 more top 5s. He had 1 more top 10, but he had his average finish was 2.3 spots higher.
Yeah,
So,
second overall.
Yeah, I mean, Buescher really had a great season. The fans voted him as the most improved driver of the year, which I think is a fair thing. But I actually picked, if I was going to be voting in that category, I would pick Byron, because Byron had such a breakout season compared to his, where I feel like Buescher, RFK overall improved, and Buescher rode that up with RFK. Now, Buescher definitely improved. I mean, he was a great breakout season for him, but I feel like Byron, with the relatively same equipment, took such a big step himself. But that said, you can't take anything away from Buescher, especially when you look at, check this number out. His average finish last year, 17.9. And as we mentioned, this year, 12.1. So 5.8 position improvement on average finish in 1 year. Triples the number of top 5s he had last year, and adds 7 top 10s to his total. Obviously a career year by every metric. But Keselowski was much improved too. Keselowski his average finish went up almost 5 spots.
It really, really impressive what RFK did. And while you could have made a case for Brad or Chris, one of them kind of making the playoffs, you know, whether they, you know, point their way in or whether they get a win somewhere along the way, to do what they did, for both of them to make the playoffs and on merit. And it was like they backed in or anything like that. And to consistently perform the level they did, it blows my mind, because this was not something that anybody saw coming. There really wasn't. Maybe you can go back to last, you know, in 2022, and you say, oh, you know, Chris won at Bristol and Brad was fast in that race, but they just, consistency wise, they didn't have the speed. And that they were able to do this, by the way, despite all of the issues we've talked about with Ford and how Ford is struggling on intermediate racetracks and short tracks. Well, guess what? Chris won on an intermediate at Michigan. He won on a short track at Richmond, and it didn't really seem to hurt them. They figured it out. They overcame that. You know, that Chris has got 3 more wins and Brad didn't have any. You know, Brad should have won this year. Like, he had ample opportunity, and he just, honestly, just sometimes it's kind of bad break. You know, right. He put himself in the right spot. It just didn't kind of go his way. Daytona at the end of the regular season comes to mind. He was really fast at Richmond. Second, Atlanta, he had a really fast race car and was controlling that race, and then Mother Nature and fuel and everything kind of, you know, intertwined there. You go back to first Atlanta, you know, that great duel with Joey Logano. Like, he was just in the mix in these races, and that's what you have to do. So impressive with what they did this year. Curious to see what they can do for next year, but we'll talk about that later. But you can't look at what they did this year and just not say, wow, A+. I mean, that it is truly an A+ effort all around, A+ performance, and it's kudos to them, because, again, what you wrote at the beginning of the year, I don't think was a popular sentiment. You know, a lot of people didn't see that. No one saw this coming.
Yeah, and you know, I think if Brad can get up there again and be the Brad that we know he's capable of doing, because he's still, you know, he's not over the hill by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he's still in his prime. So, you know, he just did have his age 39 season this year, which, as our friend David Smith has noted, is who now works for RFK.
I was
Is
going
the
to say,
driver's,
works at RFK.
that's the driver's, you know, peak performance. You know, obviously this wasn't the peak performance for Brad. He did take a step up, but you know, I feel like he's still got a couple great years left to win some races. Now it's you know, he's gone back-to-back seasons now without a win since joining RFK, but certainly a huge step up in competition level. So we'll see if they can continue to improve there. The next team in the standings is Ross Chastain and Trackhouse, because he was 9th. Daniel Suarez, his teammate, 19th. And obviously there was a pretty big disparity there between those two. So just looking at the numbers, though, you look at Chastain and you say, well, you know, he vastly outran his teammate. But Chastain also really took a step back. You know, yes, he ended up winning 2 races, Nashville and Phoenix, which he won 2 races last year. So you could say, okay, well, ultimately it's not that bad. But he had 5 fewer top 5s, 7 fewer top 10s. His average finish went down 1.7 spots. And, you know, Suarez, yes, we talk about the drop off, but he had 3 fewer top 5s, 3 fewer top 10s. His average finish, though, did go down a full 2.5 spots. So, and he obviously didn't win, and he just wasn't the factor that we thought he was going to be. I think Trackhouse as a whole took somewhat of a step back. It's unclear how much, because, you know, they obviously started off really well, then they disappeared for a while there. And, you know, Chastain had a decent playoffs at least, and obviously wins the season finale, becomes the first driver to be not in the championship 4 and win the finale in this format. But, you know, what do you make of this season? Like, I just don't really know how to evaluate it for them.
I don't, because on one hand, Ross Chastain led the point standings for 7 weeks. He was in the mix. He won 2 races, which is the same number he won the year before. He was certainly in contention for other victories this year, but there was definitely a fade. I mean, really, I don't think there's any way else to use it, but let's just say Darlington, after Darlington in the spring, that one team was very different. They didn't have the same level of consistency. They certainly didn't have the same level of performance, and they were not in the conversation anymore. I think that they were able to figure out what was kind of their issues and get better in the playoffs and show performance, and then win at Phoenix, I think was huge for them. I think Ross winning at Phoenix is a nice reminder of, hey, you know, yeah, this didn't go the way we wanted to, but we still have something here. We're still good, and we're going to figure this out. And I think that was a nice reminder, and it was much needed. I'm not too concerned with where this team is going right now. I think they're in a good spot, but the 99, it was tough. I mean, because you can't look at the 1 and then compare it to the 99. They were night and day difference at times, and it was frustrating, I know, for Suarez. And he kind of alluded to it at the end of the year. He maybe felt like he wasn't getting the same level of attention that Chastain was, and everything like that. Understandable, and that can happen within teams. But you also got to figure it out, and you've got to go out and capitalize. And too many times this year, that 99 team had races where they would make mistakes and cost themselves better finishes than they deserved. And that can't happen. And that's been kind of, frankly, that's been what Suarez has been throughout his career in the Cup Series, and that's what the 99 teams that they've started up as Trackhouse has been, where they have moments where they're like, wow, this team is somebody to look at, and then other weeks they just keep taking a shotgun to their foot, and it happens too often. The consistency that you want to see out of that team isn't there. This is a really hard team to judge overall, but you can make a case for either way. So it's hard to say, but compared to where they were in 2022, they certainly took a step back, because 2022, both those guys won races, both those guys were in the playoffs, and this year only one of those guys won races, only one of them won the playoffs, and Chastain went from finishing runner-up in the championship to being bounced.
You know, when you look at the average finish by team, the average, obviously it's a little bit unfair because, some drivers have more cars and all that stuff, but even with Austin Cindric at Penske having a really rough year, Penske's overall average finish among its 3 drivers was better than Trackhouse's. So Trackhouse essentially that they rank 6th in average finish among teams. That is not what we thought of them going into the year. It still remains to be seen. I don't think we ever got a firm, conclusive answer on what happened with how much the Darlington incident affected Chastain. Talking to Hendrick and, getting sort of a public rebuke from Justin Marks. It seemed like it was coincidence in so many ways, because that doesn't just affect an entire team's performance to drop off like that. But thought that there was an interesting quote from Ross Chastain in the Phoenix press conference at the end of the year where, there was maybe somewhat revealing. I don't know. So this is what he said, just to read this here. Talking about Justin Marks, through all the stuff he stayed with us, there was definitely public stuff that I wouldn't have said, but he's my boss and he gets to say it. He owns the team. I got to be the employee at that point. As an independent contractor, I have to listen to what he says if I want to drive the car. You all got to watch that. You all got to watch me learn through that process. So maybe there is, I felt like a lot of the season was like, nah, that had nothing to do with, the performance dropping off, but maybe there was a little bit of something there where it's like, well, there's something to it. I don't know.
But even subconsciously, like as you're getting called out by your boss publicly, by rival, Hall of Fame car owner Rick Hendrick, you've got other drivers taking shots at you and questioning you, and Jeff Gordon and Hall of Famer questioning you, and all of this stuff. How even subconsciously does that not impact you? How does it not say, "Wow, I mean, I gotta modify this a little bit," because, and I would think it did.
But that doesn't make your car go from 5th to 15th, does it?
No, no, not 5th to 15th, but there's it's a contributing factor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's part of it. I think Trackhouse took a step back performance wise after, let's just say, starting the summer. Their cars certainly weren't the same. And you factor that in. You factor in that Chevy, which got off to a blazing hot start. Remember, it felt like Chevy was going to win everything at one point, and then Toyota and Ford certainly made gains. And so that's part of it. And then you factor in like, hey, I'm kind of doing a little bit things differently now, and I'm being a little bit more mindful. Like, you start adding all this together, you can see why this is the case. And it's very easy for me to sit there and say, if I'm Trackhouse, I want Ross Chastain to cook. If you need to go out there and you need to piss everybody off because that's how you're a good driver, but you're going to give me wins and everything else, then great. But there is a bigger picture here, and I don't know. It's an interesting thing, and I don't know if we'll ever really have an answer for it, because it might not be something you can quantify and say, hey, this is how things change. It might be one of those subconscious things.
The next team is surprisingly Stewart-Haas Racing. We're talking about them before RCR, before Front Row. But that's all because of Kevin Harvick, because we're going by the lead driver in the standings.
I feel like there should be like two. We should separate Stewart-Haas. Like, there's Kevin Harvick, Stewart-Haas, and then there's the other 3 Stewart-Haas, because it is just such a juxtaposition between the two.
Yeah, I mean, Harvick finishes 13th in points, which feels like an overachievement. I think you could put Rodney Childers in the conversation for crew chief of the year in some ways, because of what they did this year. But so his average finish was 14.7, right? And again, finished 13th in points. Next driver in the points for Stewart-Haas was Eric Almirola, 22nd with a 19.6 average finish. Then you go down to Ryan Preece in 23rd with a 20.8. Chase Briscoe, his season was heavily impacted by a penalty, but he finishes 30th in points with a 20.3 average finish. Even so, like, Almirola still ends up with an average finish better than Chase Briscoe. So he would have been right in that mix anyway, probably 21st, 22nd, 23rd in points. But Harvick clearly led the way. And, in his final season for a guy at his age, I mean, pretty decent results. Obviously he didn't win, but he ends up and again, his team was way down, but his average finish only went down by 0.4. Still, it was the worst average finish he had since 2009. He had 14 top 10s, which was the worst since 2012. 6 top 5s, which was also the worst since 2012. So again, it's not the way he wanted to end it, but he at least ran competitively, where aside from his teammates having a couple times where you're like, whoa, they
Oh
pop
yeah,
up there.
flashes.
Here, maybe they could win this. And then they end up not doing it. Stewart-Haas, just a absolutely miserable year for them.
Miserable year, and kudos to the 14. They ran for the regular season. They ran much of the regular season top 5 in points, which despite all of the issues that they've had, that the 14 was able to go do that. Yes, Rodney deserves consideration to put, he's a nominee for crew chief of the year, right? He's certainly in that discussion. And Kevin showed his ability, what he could do. And it's honestly, it's a little, I don't know, sad is not the right word maybe, but it's the only word I can think of. It would have been nice. It would have been fitting if Harvick would have had a great car speed wise and what he would have been able to do, because you certainly could look at the numbers and say, that's the guy that could have won a race or two this year for sure and been in the conversation in the playoffs. And it didn't happen. And then come the playoffs, it just felt like this team ran out of steam. It felt like once Darlington happened and that win got away from them, it was just like that put a pin in their balloon. They were out of the playoffs. And, at that point, the attention kind of focused elsewhere. And Rodney kind of said that as much too. Like, hey, we don't care about getting to the championship 4. We just want to win races. And it's frustrating, but it's really hard to pick apart what that 4 team did. They deserve all of the credit in the world for being better, for being given ingredients that weren't the best. They sure made a pretty damn good tasty recipe. And then the 14, the 41, and the 10, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, and they are what they are. It's like you said, Jeff, I think you summed it best. Like, they would have these races out of Martinsville where you're like, hey man, this team has kind of figured it out. Like, and then other weeks they would just be out to lunch. There was no consistency. There's no performance. There really wasn't much of a silver lining you can look at and say, okay, yeah, this team is headed in the right direction. Maybe you could say a little bit with Briscoe, who seemed to get better as the year went on, but especially after the crew chief change. But this was just a lost year for this team, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty surrounding this organization, and they, who knows what the future. I mean, who knows what all that's going to sort out. But just performance-wise, like, they have got to get better. Like, they cannot continue to run like this, and there's no reason for them to.
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like even as the other Ford teams got better, they never were able to,
No.
RFK wins. Okay. It's like, oh, and all the Ford, even I think Blaney at the time said, or, later said, hey, we saw what RFK started to do. And we thought, okay, well, maybe Fords overall aren't as bad and we can go to work and find something here. Then Penske rises up and wins the championship after RFK had gotten hot. Right. So it's like the other Ford team. And then you just kept waiting. Surely Harvick, he's going to have this great moment. And I thought it was going to be Phoenix, right? I mean, he did lead laps at Phoenix.
Yeah.
But I thought maybe this is the time. And they just never quite got there. Tough year, tough way to go out for him in his last season. You just wonder, let's say they had, not even in Stewart-Haas's best season, but just an average season for Stewart-Haas. Harvick would have gotten that moment where he's won races. Maybe he's made a championship 4 run. It would have just been so much more rewarding, but just bad timing with the team as a whole being down.
Yes, and they've had these issues for a while now, and they still haven't been able to figure it out, and that's concerning.
The next team on our list is Kyle Busch and Richard Childress Racing. Only finishes 14th in points, which was a disappointing playoff run for them. But, he did win 3 races. So you're like, okay, well, at least they had a good start to the season. When you look at Kyle Busch's numbers overall, they were a step up from his final year at Joe Gibbs Racing. He won 2 more races than he did in his last year at JGR. He had 2 more top 5s. He had the same number of top 10s, and he had a better average finish. However, in his final year at JGR, he finishes 13th in points. This year, 14th. Still not the Kyle Busch of old, but again, if you go to a team in your first year, if you would have said, in our team by team preview that we did earlier this season in January to get ready for the year, if you would have said, hey, Kyle Busch wins 3 races, you would have said successful year no matter what, right? I mean, so now problem is his teammate Austin Dillon. I picked Austin Dillon to make the playoffs this year because I thought Kyle Busch is going to come there, he's going to elevate the organization, Dillon's going to run better because of that. Dillon had just an absolutely miserable year. Yes, he had a penalty. He did say that penalty contributed to him starting to press way too much. He said it at Phoenix. He said, quote, "We tried to double down and make up some of those points, and I started getting in wrecks. Some things in my control, some things out of it. And then we just had times when we weren't good." He had the worst average finish of his career. He had a series leading 10 DNFs, all due to crashes. And it just miserable. He had only 1 top 5 all season, 29th in points. Again, part of that, a 60-point penalty, but a lot of it to the DNF. So quite the tale of 2 drivers there that are at RCR this year.
It is, and there's not much to say about Dillon. You touched on it all. The 10 DNFs is a number that has to get better. And this team just never really got its footing. It felt like at the beginning of the year they kind of had some setbacks, and you thought, okay, you can get through this, you'll be okay. And they just never were able to right the ship. And as Dillon said, it felt like they just pressed. And once it got into kind of a win, we need to win now mode, it really put this team in a mode where they were making mistakes, and Dillon was putting himself in bad spots. And 10 wrecks, you cannot have 10 DNFs all due to crashes. That's just a number that you cannot expect to be in the conversation for anything positive if that's the case. He's a better driver than this. That team is better than this. I'm curious to see how they bounce back. Kyle Busch, you just said that before the year, hey, you're going to go to RCR, you're going to win 3 races. He hasn't won that number of many races, I think, since his title year in 2019. So that was impressive, and he did a good job, and he fit in nicely there. There was a lot of questions about what it was going to be like over there. How was he going to adapt? How was RCR going to adapt to him? How was he going to adapt to RCR? And it, honestly, by all accounts, hand in glove, peanut butter and jelly. Like they no issues, like no issues. Like it's a good fit for everybody. He won races, but the thing that needs to get better is and what really prevented them from having even a better year, too many mistakes, particularly from the driver. And Kyle has said this car does not suit his driving style. He has a hard time getting comfortable with it. And he cost himself potentially good finishes several times this year because of mistakes. Michigan, Loudon come to mind. Texas was another one. You got to eliminate that. You basically kind of got to take, if you can't try to push too hard in this car. We have seen what happens when you do. You sometimes just got to take what it gives you. And Busch is going to have to get better at that. But again, I don't care about the points finish and everything like that. I look at the fact that for a good stretch of this year, they were, top 3, top 4 in points. They did a really good job. They had the kind of the first year you wanted to see out of this team, where you look at this and say, hey, you know what? This is going to work. This did work. And going forward, we've got something to build off of here.
Well, you might have answered the question because you're talking about the year as a whole, but this is a really interesting one to me. And I don't know exactly where I land on this as I'm asking it. So a big preseason question was, who will have the better year with their new team, Tyler Reddick or Kyle Busch, right? Because it was not a straight swap, but, was taking over Reddick's ride. Reddick was going to Toyota, again, not at JGR, but, he was getting into an opportunity similar to what Kyle Busch had. So who was going to have the better year, right? Kyle Busch ends up winning 3 races to Reddick's 2. They have the exact same amount of top 5s, 10 each. Kyle Busch has just 1 more top 10, 17 to 16. And his average finish was very close. Kyle Busch was 15.0, Reddick 15.7. Reddick ends up leading a couple hundred more laps, and Reddick ends up 6th in the points, where Kyle Busch was 14th because of the playoffs. So who had the better year?
I think it's Reddick, and I think it's because of the laps led. I think that's the difference to me. If everything else is close, the one statistic that really isn't is the laps led. The 470 laps led that Reddick had was the difference. Both teams left a lot of points on the table this year. Left finishes, they sometimes made too many mistakes. But I really, and I will say this, to me, Reddick and that 45 team got significantly better as the year went along. The 8 team of Kyle Busch seemed to kind of get hot early and ride it. They got they got 3 wins in the first 15 races or something like that, and then from there, let's just say after he won at Gateway, how many times was Kyle Busch in the mix for a win? How many times we talk about him as a contender? It was a tale of, they were 2 different directions. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to give it to Reddick just because he got better at the end of the year, and he certainly led a fair number of laps more.
I'm going to give it to Busch, sort of for the reasons you laid out
Oh,
right before you totally reverse course on me here. You talked about how good he was in the start of the year, and was running top 2, top 3 at times, and he had one more win. He had a better average finish. He had the same number of top 5s, and he had one more top 10. So, except for the laps led, he has the edge in every category. So therefore, even though the playoffs switch this up, I think as a whole, better year overall, I would give the nod to Kyle Busch there.
even with him going out early in the playoffs?
It's yeah, I mean, he didn't have the as good of a last 10 races, but I'm talking overall who had the better year. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's how much do you want to put stock in the playoffs, I guess. I don't know. All right. So now we are on to see, where are we? Oh, Front Row Motorsports, Michael McDowell. Now, obviously, Michael
Todd
McDowell.
Gilliland.
What?
And Todd Gilliland.
Well, I'm saying he's the reason I'm mentioning him in the standings.
Yeah. Sorry.
He won a race at the Indy Road Course, which was really, I think, the moment of his career in a lot of ways, because that was more impressive than Daytona 500. And finished 15th in points, respectable, certainly. However, they didn't really, they kind of disappeared in the playoffs, and to the point where it really affected his season overall, because he actually declined in top 10s. He had 4 fewer top 10s than last year, and his average finish went from 16.7 to 19.0. And I think that was largely a lot of, just the end there, the end of the season, they just kind of ran out of steam, I guess. I don't know. Let's see, in the playoffs, he had 2 top 10s, no top 5s. He had a 6th at Bristol, and he finished 9th at Phoenix. But he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 finishes in the playoffs outside the top 20. That's disappointing, considering how competitive they were for so much of the year. Even points wise, very late in the regular season, they were 15th in points. So, I don't know. I just feel like that they kind of almost plateaued or something. Like we'd seen continued improvement from them. And yes, again, it's weird to say that, they went backwards a little bit, because he did win that road course, but that playoffs, they just sort of just lost their edge at the end of the year. I don't know. And then Todd Gilliland, he had sort of that weird disjointed season where he did have to go to Rick Ware at times, because Zane Smith, they put in that car for some sponsorship reasons. But Gilliland still, even with the Rick Ware races included in his average finish, he still improved his average finish, and he doubled his number of top 10s from last year from 2 to 4. So it feels like Gilliland is still, building. He only had 4 DNFs. You feel like he needs to take another step forward, but I think he's getting a well-deserved 3rd year for Front Row.
Yeah, I mean, Michael McDowell in that 34 team for much of the year was a surprise. They were just running very, very well, consistently running in the top 10, top 15, maximizing their performance on a weekly basis. to where they were in the playoff conversation even without that win in Indianapolis. But then to go to Indianapolis on a road course and to beat everybody convincingly. They didn't back into this. This was no fluke. This was a straight up butt kicking. And to beat Chase Elliott on a road course like that in the manner they did, that to me, regardless whatever else happened the rest of the year, like that just made their year, and they deserve all the kudos for that. Really impressed with what this team did. It certainly wasn't easy, and I think you made a great point when you said they just kind of lost steam in the playoffs. Like, they got into a wreck at Darlington, not their own doing. They got swept up in somebody else's incident at Darlington, and that put them on their back foot. Same thing happened at Kansas. They didn't execute well. They got caught up in another thing, and then going into Bristol, they were just like almost in a must-win mode. That's a really hard spot for this team to be in. But they went there. They ran 6, and then after that, it was just like the deflated, like, our season's kind of shot. Because really, the goal for this team was we just want to get out of the first round. Like, that was the goal. I mean, everybody had said that within an organization. They had never accomplished that before, and it didn't happen. And that's tough. And I get that. That's a stomach punch to deal with. But there's a lot of things to be happy with if you're that 34 team. Michael is a guy who we know what he can do. Like, you give him good cars, he's going to go win races. He's going to make the most out of it. And new crew chief this year, and our first crew chief, Travis Peterson, who really showed his skill level. Like, there's a lot of positives to take from this, even though maybe the season didn't end they want to. And overall, yeah, I mean, Todd Gilliland, second year, made big progress. Certainly show that he deserves a third year with that organization. He's going to have to continue to make that progress for sure. But you look at what he did, especially at the beginning of the year. He was really running well, running consistently in a tough situation where you're getting bounced around. And you go into Daytona, he didn't have anything necessarily set up. Like, it was like kind of a scramble mode. But he did it, and he did a good job. Has to qualify a little bit better, has to do a better job of starting the week out stronger. But there's a lot of positives to take from this. In front row, they built something there. And in this age of where the smaller mid-sized team, if you can get the right people in the mix and you can kind of hit on something, you have an opportunity to do it. They showed that this year. This team is continuing to make strides and to continuing to build really a big gold star for that team and what they were able to accomplish across the board.
Next up, speaking of losing steam at the end of the season, was JTG Doherty and Ricky Stenhouse Jr., obviously a single car team. They win the Daytona 500. And for much of the year, he is in the top 16 in points anyway. And it's like, wow, okay, this is really impressive here. I think just at the Daytona regular season finale, he ended up 17th in points for the regular season. But other than that, he would have made it on points anyway, which is really a huge step up. But then the playoffs start. And by the way, even with this bad playoff that I'm about to talk about, his average finish from last year took a full 5-position gain. So that is really impressive. He had 4 more top 10s than last year, 9 top 10s, which is his most since 2017. Really the second best year of Stenhouse's career overall when you look at the numbers. But then the playoffs happen. Unfortunately, they end with 6 straight finishes of 19th or worse to close the playoffs. Just completely, they couldn't get out of their own way. It all fell apart. But it was a year to build on. Stenhouse said at Phoenix that one of their major focuses for next year is going to be qualifying, because this year he ranked 25th in the series in average starting position. He started, his average qualifying position was 21.8. So he was gaining, he ended up gaining 4 spots per race on average, but he was always starting behind. So Stenhouse said our bad races are better and our good races are better, but if we brought up that qualifying average, we can take another step forward. Which again, if you're starting on the back foot, you're making it harder on yourself to get stage points. You're potentially getting in, as hard as it is to pass, you're at a huge deficit in general. You're having to rely on all sorts of, strategy or great pit stops or finding track position somehow. But again, overall, I would say a successful year for JTG.
Very, very successful year. It didn't end how they wanted it to, but there is nothing you can point at this season and say this wasn't a success, because they did. They obviously won Daytona, which you win Daytona, it's going to change the complexion of the year. But this was a level of consistency and performance from driver and team that we have never seen before. The knock on Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is what? He drives too aggressively, makes too many mistakes, costs his team too many chances. What did he do during the regular season? And that was the big onus, was Ricky needs to be better. Ricky needs to take what the car is and finish. If he's got a 10th place car, finish 10th. Don't try to finish 8th, just finish 10th. And he did that. And it worked. And it really did for them. It's a formula that a lot of teams need to do, is just take what it gives you and don't try to do too much. And for the regular season, the consistency they had was so impressive. We've never seen that from Stenhouse before. We have never seen that from JTG before. And this team, I was impressed. I mean, it was a level that was like, we've been waiting to see this from Ricky for a long time. This is the guy who came in the Cup Series, 2-time Xfinity Series champion, was supposed, great things were expected of him, and it hasn't happened. And more than anything, he's a guy that you look at and he makes mistakes. He doesn't always cost himself good finishes because he'll do something silly. That wasn't the case this year. And unfortunately for him, come the playoffs though, their execution went by the wayside. They had issues on pit road. They sped a little bit. Ricky tried to do a little too much, and the formula that they had for the first 26 races wasn't in place for the final 10, and that cost them. And that's too bad. But there is so much to build upon here, that if they can continue to do this, and Ricky can continue to deliver like he delivered this year. Mike Kelly's a really good crew chief. We joke that he's the Ricky whisperer, but he showed it. And that team did some restructuring behind the scenes. Well, the onus now is going to be on them to continue to build off this, and that's really hard for these teams at these mid-level to do. Is how do you continue to grow and get better? But at least you could see that they had the pieces there to do it this year, and it's really hard to quibble with the year they had.
Up next is Colleague Racing. Even though they, Allmendinger won the Roval, but this is not the year that Colleague was looking for. There's a couple numbers that jump out to me when we're talking about Colleague Racing. So this was obviously Allmendinger's return to full-time Cup racing for the first time since 2018. But he had run a half season last year, Jordan. Well, guess what? In this full season, he had fewer top tens than he had running a half season in Cup last year. He had 8 last year, top 10s, 7 this year. His average finish compared to that half season went down by over 4 spots. They just, we picked him to make the playoffs because we thought he was going to win a road course. He did, but it was
just the wrong time of the year.
Yeah, and they were just not competitive. Now, another weird one here is Justin Haley. He obviously announces in July that he is going to Rick Ware Racing because, in part, he could see the writing on the wall that he was going to need to bring money to Colleague or he was going to be without a ride. So he went to a multi-year deal at Rick Ware. Unfortunately, that was the end of his season, essentially, at Colleague, because here's what happened. So that Monday, you'll remember that the New Hampshire race was rained out in mid-July, right? He finished on that Monday 17th, which was his 11th top 20 finish of the year to that point. He was 21st in points. Justin Haley. I mean, he was having a really solid year for what we thought of, his chances going in. It was impressive. He was stringing together some good results. Well, for the rest of the year, he then announces that week, I'm going to Rick Ware. For the rest of the year, he only had 2 top 20 finishes the rest of the entire season after he had 11 to that point, and he tumbles all the way to 26th in points. Highly forgettable end to his tenure there. Did not go well, and it ended up costing him his average finish. Last year was 18.4. And you thought, wow, this guy's really, and he finished 22nd in points. You're like, this guy's building on something. And then once that was announced, dropped off a cliff, average finish declined. He ended up still with more top 10s than he had a career high with 6, but Colleague, they're searching for answers at this point. And we still haven't officially heard all their plans, I guess, as they're recording this podcast. But we're looking for reasons to be optimistic, but not seeing a whole lot at this moment.
Yeah. Good luck on that search. I expected more out of Colleague this year. I thought they were doing a really good job of kind of making steady, incremental steps. And I thought bringing AJ Allmendinger in this year was going to really lift them up. Even if they couldn't win a race, I thought AJ was going to do well enough to be a factor in the points. And he was. I mean, until mid-August, he was in the playoff conversation and had a path to make the playoffs on points. And then you can question the decision you want to go to Road American race and over, putting a focus on qualifying at Richmond and whatever. They just never hit on it. They started the gate slow. They did not have speed on intermediate racetracks. They just lacked speed. It was a struggle to figure that out. It took them a while. Once they started to figure it out, they were kind of buried a little bit. And, you mentioned Justin Haley, and it's a curious thing because you hear teams all the time say, no, we're not going to change our focus, and we're going to continue to, we're going to continue to focus on this team the rest of the year, blah, 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 even though changes are coming. The numbers bear otherwise, and that's unfortunate. There's a saving grace here is that AJ was able to win the race at the Roval, and that does change the complexion of the year. And it shows like, hey, you guys are good enough to do this. You guys are good enough to build competitive race cars. And his run at Olmsted, I think, too, is impressive. And it shows like this team, like you can see it. You can see the flashes of why you think they can do some great things, but the consistency isn't there. And when you're a small team and you get behind, it's really hard to play catch up in the middle of the year. It's really hard. It didn't help that they got caught up in that penalty stuff as well, with the louvers and everything else and all of that stuff. And it was a tough year. And we going into next year, I know we don't want to talk about 24, but like, I don't know how you can't talk about Colleague Racing and not look ahead to 24. Explain to me, if I'm a Colleague Racing fan, if I'm looking for a reason for optimism, why 2024 is going to be better than 2023, because frankly, I don't see it.
That would be, talk about one of the bigger shocks if they improved.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Like,
I just don't see that right now. But
I don't see it. Like how? Like, I no offense to Daniel Hemrick, and let's just presume it's Ty Dillon. Let's just hypothetically pick a name out of the blue and say it's Ty Dillon. Like, how is that going to give you a better lineup? Like, Hemrick is fine. But he's not going to go win races. He's not going to pull out a win out of his hat somewhere. Like, at least Allmendinger gives you a fighting chance to get a win. And Justin Haley is a young talent who you can build around, and is showing, like, if you give him good race cars, he knows what to do with them, and he doesn't make mistakes. You look at his numbers, like, he doesn't crash. He doesn't tear up his equipment. He does a good job of keeping his car in peace, which as a small team is what you want, because you're not having to spend money to fix them. And you're bringing in I don't know, whatever.
Spire is next on the list with Corey LaJoie.
Your facial reactions, by the way, are amazing.
Why? What am I doing?
It's just great. If you're listening to this in the audio version, please go back and just take the video clip of the Colleague of Jeff, because his facial reactions are fantastic.
I just don't know what to say. I mean,
you can't. Yeah.
All right. Corey LaJoie, 25th. Speaking of people that don't tear up their equipment, he went the entire season plus the Clash and the Duel and the All-Star Open without any DNFs at all. The racing experts had noted that makes him just the 15th driver in Cup Series history to finish every race, and only the 5th since 2017 when the crash clock came into play. It's easy to look at LaJoie sometimes and think, oh, is he really stacking pennies? Is he really improving? Yes, he is. If you look at his average finish, once again, he's taken a step up for the, fifth year in a row. He has topped his average finish over the previous season, all the way up to 20.8 this year. Last year was 24.3. So a significant jump. He had career highs in top fives with 2, in top 10s with 3. And Spire is obviously on the move. We'll save that conversation till next year's preview, but they're on the rise. He is continuing there. And, look, when you finish every race, that's an achievement itself. I mean, that's very hard to do. Mechanical, not getting caught up in wrecks, not making stupid moves, or whatever it is. I mean, that's impressive right there. Unfortunately, there was another Spire car this year, easy to forget at times, but Ty Dillon also raced for the team this year. And look, by all accounts, Ty Dillon, I've never heard anybody say Ty Dillon's a jerk, Ty Dillon's not a nice guy, but he had one of the most forgettable, miserable seasons in the entire modern era, I would say. Just really bad. It just did not go well for them at all. And even by Ty Dillon, I mean, so his average finish was 27.5, worse than the series of people that competed full-time. His qualifying average, 31.9, also lowest. But that number, like the 27.5, even those years at like Germain Racing, stuff like that, this is way down from that. I mean, he's finished 24th in points a couple times. He was 32nd in points this year. Nothing really positive at all. I mean, not even a top 10 to get excited about. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what you say. He was the only full-time driver without a top 10 all year.
He doesn't tear up equipment. That's good.
I guess. I mean, he only had 17 lead lap finishes, so less than half of 15 lead lap finishes. That was Harrison Burton's number, 17. 15 lead lap finishes. So, yeah, I guess on a positive note, as you said, he only had 6 DNFs, but I don't know, man. That was we had asked at some point, like, and people had talked about this. Well, is LaJoie getting better stuff? Is he like have a better package? No, apparently they had the exact same equipment, exact same engines and stuff all year. It's just one team, improved and performed, one didn't. You hate to say that about somebody, they didn't get it done, but this is a professional sport. You got to judge it off the stats. Their numbers were not good. I just don't know what else to say about it. It just was, especially when we're talking about comparing to your teammates, it wasn't a good year.
No, I mean, there's not much more to say than that. I'll just say it was an odd hire when they made the hire to bring Ty Dillon in. I understand why they did it, but it was questionable why they did it, or it was questionable hire to begin with, and nothing that unfolded in 2023 made me think otherwise. And, we'll see. Next year's going to be really telling. When you bring in Zane Smith, when you bring in Carson Osavar, that should make that 77 program and really Spire as a whole, because they're adding a third car, better. We'll see. Corey LaJoie, tremendous year, great year. Could have even been a better year, honestly, because qualifying was a big problem for this team this year. They had one of the worst average starting positions. Their qualifying was a huge problem from this year. Too often, they would start races in the back and have to work their way forward. That's really hard when you're racing in a car and an aero package where it's hard to pass and track position matters so much and everybody's got the same stuff largely. You're facing an uphill climb. But a lot of weeks though, they figured it out. And then they even had races too that should have been better. Bristol night race comes to mind. Corey qualifies really well that race, racing well, running in the top 10. And just you got to take what it gives you a little bit. And sometimes there's a little bit of over eagerness there, sometimes a little bit of mistakes, but that team really overall has a lot to be proud of. Ryan Sparks did a good job, crew chief there, underrated, building fast race cars and building that team up. And next year's let's continue to see this. Let's see what happens. But you're looking at the results of 2023. There's a lot to be proud of.
Next up is Legacy Motor Club. Would you be surprised, Jordan, to learn that Legacy Motor Club had the same average finish this season as Spire Motorsports, 24.1 for both? And that includes all of Legacy's drivers.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me because, the 77 was really bad. So, and Eric Jones, if you look at his average finish this year, was right around 20, I think 20.7.
20.4, yeah.
20.4, excuse me, I'm sorry, off 0.3. And this is off the top of my head, by the way. Like, I mean, Eric ran really, really well. Like, I mean, so it doesn't surprise me because, and the 42 car at times, like,
Wait,
I mean, I
I
guess,
was thinking that would be, I was thinking it was a surprise in the reverse way. Wouldn't you think that Legacy Motor Club would have a higher average finish than Spire? No, you wouldn't think that?
no, because I mean, Gregson was not good. Like, Gregson's numbers were bad.
Yeah.
Like, they were really, I mean, he was second or third of the guys at the time he parted ways with the team. He was second or third from the bottom of guys who ran full time in
Well,
points.
he had
Like
a
it was,
worse, let's just say he had a worse average finish than Ty Dillon this season.
yeah, like it was not good.
Noah
Like the
Gregson's
results were not
average
like
finish was 28.2.
even before he did what he did, there was a reason that Noah Gregson was likely on his way out because the performance wasn't there. It was not a good fit, and all of that. So no, I mean but they're a weird team to gauge because they're one of those teams. You look at the 43 car some weeks and you're like, damn, they're on it. Like they're running really, really well. Consistency wise, though, wasn't there. And when they did have fast race cars, they still made too many mistakes. And it's tough because this was a team very much in transition this year. It's almost you kind of got to give them a little bit of a pass because you got a new ownership group coming in and new ideas, a lot of behind the scene changes and all of that. And then on top of it, you announce you're switching manufacturers. Now you're not necessarily getting a whole lot from Chevrolet to begin with, but still, like you're now whatever you were getting, it's sure a hell a lot less. And now you're going into Toyota, and there's a lot that goes into that. And so this was a team in transition. And so it's really hard to. It's almost like if you're gonna give them a letter grade, it'd almost be incomplete because then you throw in the fact that we had to make a driver change because a guy did something stupid on social media and those kind of things. It's just hard. Like we know what Eric Jones can do. We know if you give him good equipment, he can go up and run well. And Dave Ellens is such an underrated crew chief. Like I don't think people realize how great of a crew chief he is in terms of track position and knowing how to get track position and building fast race cars. But this was a tough team. We'll see what they can do next year. Bringing in a John Hernimacek is certainly an upgrade. But there's a lot that has to go into this. I think they're going to be better off going forward, but it was hard to get through this year at times for that organization.
Yeah, Eric Jones ends up with the worst average finish of his career, even worse than 2021, which is not a good year for him. Did have one more top 5 and one more top 10 this year than in that year, but they did definitely picked up the performance. I mean, you look at when Jones, he was third in the Kansas playoff race, got a top 10 at Darlington in the Southern 500. And he said, at Phoenix, he said, we lost a handful of our tools that we had early in the season after our announcements, and we had to go on our own. So
yeah,
they had to rely on their notes and kind of go old school a little bit because they weren't getting that support. And you should definitely anticipate an improvement for them next year, I would think. And Hocevar came in and certainly was an improvement over what Gregson had been doing in his 8 races. He fell off a little bit toward the end, but I mean, his average finish, Hocevar's average finish was a 23.1 in his 8 races versus the 28.2 for Gregson. And Hocevar, I mean, you were for a while there, those first, well, he ended up, the last 4 races were not so good, but he goes 17th, 20th, 11th, 16th in his first 4 races with Legacy. You're like, whoa, where did this come from? Those were all in the playoffs too. That was really impressive. Mm-hmm. Then he had 2 crashes. He got into it at Martinsville, and Phoenix was just okay. He was just trying to stay under the radar, I think, at that point in Phoenix after the truck race. But anyway, they definitely took a step up in performance at the end of the season, certainly in the playoffs. But as a whole, overall, a forgettable one for Legacy. So that leaves us now with, I believe, Harrison Burton, which you could really lump in the Wood brothers with Penske since they are a Penske car. But this is another person with that, he's getting another year. So, that's great for him, but it was not a good year. Took a step back in average finish, down almost 2 full spots. Had a couple top 10s, no top 5s. And, again, that is a Penske prepared car. Yes, it's the Wood brothers, but that is essentially out of the Penske shop. So you need to see more out of that. Now, again, though, they obviously saw enough to bring him back. So, but a Penske car won the championship, and I don't really know what you do with that information, but Harrison Burton, aside from Ty Dillon, when you look at full-time drivers, had, some of the, tied for the fewest top fives. Obviously he had 0, second fewest top tens, only 25 laps led, second worst, average finish. So just, they just, it seems like either, well, I would have said it this year, he's got to take a step up in performance, or his tenure is not going to be very long, but they went backwards this year. He gets another year. So I would still think, though, that next year he's really got to take a step up.
Yeah, I mean, year 3 is going to be critically important for Harrison Burton, and whether he gets a year 4, and whether, especially with a team like Penske, and let's just say this is a Penske team. Everybody knew going in that this was a long-term building project, that Harrison probably was getting jumped to the Cup Series quicker than he probably should be, and that this was a building project. And it was a struggle at the beginning of the year. They had flashes. They'd had races where they ran well, and the finishes went by the wayside for various reasons. Talladega mentioned that, and they couldn't string together good races, and they couldn't when they did have they had good speed. It was a problem of finishing well. Jeremy Bullins comes over. They make a crew chief change. He comes in for Brian Wilson. Brian Wilson goes over to Austin Cindric. That should help a little bit. Pairing a rookie driver with a rookie crew chief is always a tough thing. I think Jeremy Bullins is a good fit there. Jeremy has really done a good job with young drivers. He did a good job with Blaney, for example. Let's see what they can do. It's a struggle, and they have got to better. They've got to be better. You didn't see the step up. I mean, when you have a worse average finish and you have a worse starting position than you had the year before, that's not good. But it doesn't help when your organization is struggling. Like, Austin Cindric also took a step back in the same equipment. And so, and when you've got, when Joey Logano struggles, it shows you that the equipment there isn't to the level it needed to be. But even then, the drivers got to be better. There's no reason they should be where they are in points. That can't be. Year 3 is, I don't want to say it's make or break, but it kind of feels like it's make or break in some levels.
I mean, this might be an unfair comparison, but you give Matt DiBenedetto the boot after a second year, in which he was, competitive. I mean, he had 20 combined top tens in his 2 years.
Made the playoffs one year.
Made the playoffs once. His average finish was, even in the last year that he was ousted, was 16.9. He had 3 top 5s in each of those years. So, again, 2 years now at the Wood brothers for Harrison Burton. And again, he's a young driver, but 1 top 5 finish and 4 top 10s to show for it in 2 seasons. Again, like, you had somebody in that car that you said was not good enough, right? Like, he didn't bring sponsorship either, but like, no, this guy's not getting it done. And, he's gone.
Well,
what?
I mean, it was never a performance thing with Matt. Like, I'm not trying to make excuses, but Matt's thing was twofold. You mentioned the sponsorship thing, and then let's be honest, there was the personality part of it too, like the fit. And on both of those things, he didn't work. And so, yeah, I mean, but he did show what that team is capable of and what they can do. And that's the thing. And like, this is the bar of what this team is capable of is being in the mix for the playoffs. They certainly have fallen short the last 2 years.
The last team I believe to discuss is Rick Ware Racing.
But no, not going to do Live Fast.
Oh, Live Fast. Yeah. Sorry. Forgot about Live Fast. My apologies.
That's all right.
Live Fast. Well, let's talk about Rick Ware Racing first, because I have their stats up. So they didn't have any full-time drivers this year. JJ Yeley came the closest. He made 26 starts. They ended up using 12 different drivers for their 2 cars. Yaley's average finish was 27th in his 26 races. So as much as we're talking about, wow, Ty Dillon was really bad and all that stuff. I mean, the Rick Ware cars were pretty much right down there. They had 2 combined top 10s the entire season for all their drivers. One was Riley Herbst and one was Yaley. So, Rick Ware obviously is going to try to take a step up now, with hiring Justin Haley full time. They had Cody Ware in the car, then he has the domestic violence incident, and he's gone after 7 races. But he was going to have a miserable season, it looked like, as well. So, they really never hit on anybody. I mean, out of all the drivers that were in their car this year, Jenson Button had the best average finish for them. No, I take that back. Riley Herbst, actually. Riley Herbst, then Jenson Button. So, but I think the Riley Herbst cars were Stewart-Haas prepared, obviously. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Rick Ware, they've got room to improve.
Yeah, I mean, they do have room to improve. And it's a hard team to grade because kind of like Legacy, this was a transition year for them, like where what they're doing on the racetrack this year is part of a bigger plan. There was moments this year where you felt like the things they were doing, you could see it kind of coming together a little bit, and they've gotten better. Like, they have gotten better. They still have a lot of room to improve. But there was times this year, like Cole Custer got in one of their cars at New Hampshire, for example, was running top 20 lap times and was running, solidly. He was positioned to get a good finish and makes a mistake and gets in the wall. And so, it's tough because, they partner with RFK Racing. They move over to their headquarters there. There's a tight alliance. They're getting a little bit of support from Ford. You can see what they're doing, but this year there was a little bit of flashes here and there. It wasn't to the level that you want to see. There's a lot of room for improvement, no doubt. But I will say, going forward, it looks promising. I think bringing in a Justin Haley is a huge thing. I think that really, really positions that team in a good way. It gives them a driver to build around, and it helps too when you know who your driver is going to be every single week, and you're not rotating and mixing and matching guys. Chemistry can be a little overblown at times, but there's something to it. And when you've got a driver in there and a talented driver like that who can get the job done, that's going to help. But there's certainly steps to be taken over there.
You mentioned Live Fast, as I almost forgot them.
Oh, could you forget about Live Fast?
Well, they're not going to really exist in its current form after this podcast, or next year, I guess. But BJ McLeod ends up running the bulk of the races, 23 races, 29.5 average finish, which is actually down from his last 2 seasons. Really nothing to get too excited about there. As an organization, they had Anthony Alfredo in for a couple races. They had Josh Balicki in for 10. His average finish was lower than BJ McLeod's. Sheldon Creed in for 1 race. They had, overall, no matter how you look at it, they were the lowest of all the teams, lower than Rick Ware Racing in terms of stats, performance. And they end up selling their charter for a lot. And BJ he's not cashing out because he's still going to be around, but certainly he is making out good off of their investment, you would think, the investment that he and Matt Tifft had put into that. So that's good for him. Hopefully it allows him to do some other things where he can be a little bit more competitive, because they just never, I don't know if they were hoping that the next gen would really be even that much more of a playing field where they could just, not have to worry about, it would almost take care of the performance for them in some ways, where they could really, but they never were able to get that accomplished.
Yeah, and BJ kind of said that much a few weeks ago when he met with the media, and that this was a tough slog, and it didn't come together kind of like they were hoping for. You look at the numbers this year, a lot of DNFs because of mechanical failures, which tells you that it's tough. I mean, it's tough for a team like this to get through each and every race. It's unfortunate because BJ's a character. BJ's one of those guys who you think if he could get in the right situation might be able to do something. And there was a belief there of, hey, let's grow this slowly, but it just never came together the way they wanted it to. Be interesting to see what BJ does next, and what the next phase of his career looks like. You wanted to see this team succeed because of the blueprint. Like, these blue collar guys, they're fighting to get this together. They're putting together this small team, and they're going to grow. Sometimes these things just don't work, and sometimes these fairy tales don't have the endings that you want, and certainly the case, and that's the reality right now with this team.
All right. So we've reached the end of the team thing. We've gone through every team. Let's give an award, a fictional award for organization of the year. That criteria is up to you. You can make whatever you want out of it. Organization of the year. It could be, maybe it's a team like RFK, which rose up and had a better year than people expected. Maybe it's a team like Hendrick that had the most wins. Maybe it's a team like Joe Gibbs Racing that had the best overall performance among its drivers, you know, a 4-car team like that. Do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
Oh no, I'm gonna let you go first because I mean I think I know I'm gonna go in the direction I'm gonna go in. This is a really, really tough category because you can make a case for at least 3 teams, and I could even say maybe 4.
Yeah, I mean it's the criteria is up to you. However, my team of the year is Joe Gibbs Racing. So you had the regular season champion.
Yep.
You had they did have a Final Four participant. You had 3 cars, which, you know, up until sort of the end, you could have made a case for them being championship worthy. I mean, you would have expected Truex to come back up. And then you had the 4th car, despite being a rookie, had a really, really good season and won Rookie of the Year. So when I'm looking at the entire strength of the organization, the entire picture, which again, it's not just a 2-car team, but a big team, which was really talking about winning races, being contenders on a weekly basis. You felt like you had to go through all their cars essentially in some weeks. I'm going with Joe Gibbs Racing. They get the nod over Hendrick despite not having the same number of wins, because Hendrick, to me, with their 2 drivers going winless and not having the same performance as the other 2, I'm not just going to say give it to the organization as a whole, because 2 of them sort of carried the rest of the team. That's my logic.
Yeah, no, I can't argue with that. I was gonna go with. I'm looking at it. I'm sorry. I'm trying to piece this together here.
I will say RFK, even though it's
you
2
can make a
cars
case.
versus whatever, they had the best average finish.
Yeah,
They had a better average finish than any other team. So there's a case there.
There's a case, and honestly, I think if Brad would have won a race, Brad not winning a race is the difference maker there. Like if Brad wins a race, like okay, I can do that. Him not winning a race is tough to do. I mean, part of me, I mean, they're in consideration. I would say like 2311 Racing deserves a nod for what Bubba and Tyler did this year. I don't want to put them as my organization here. I'm going to go with Hendrick though. I know that's going to sound weird, but they did get 10 wins. I know that came from 2 drivers. But at the end of the day, consistently, the guys who the first and second in wins were both Hendrick drivers. First and second in laps led were Hendrick drivers. You throw in Chase Elliott's really good average finish this year, and the fact
And
that
the 9 team made it to the final 8.
yeah, like it wasn't a typical dominant. It didn't feel like earlier this year, it felt like Hendrick was never going to lose, and it definitely subsided. They also put 2 drivers in the championship 4. Like you start looking at this, I just don't know who else was better. You could make a case for JGR saying they're remaining the same level, but the wins, the laps led are the difference for me. But again, like I don't feel good about that because I feel like I can make a case for a few different organizations, and I think JGR is certainly deserving of that as well.
I mean, it's hard to argue. I mean, you make really good points. I might be a little swayed there.
Usually it's pretty clear cut. Like it's usually pretty clear cut. Oh man. And I think if Bell could have won another race or led more laps this year, kind of had the year we thought he would, or maybe Ty slips into victory lane, like that would have been a difference as well. But it's just, oh man, I don't know. I feel like I'm talking myself out of Hendrick now, but it's hard.
Yeah, very interesting to think about. All right, well, that wraps up that. And now, Jordan, we have a special request for all our listeners if you've made it to the end of this podcast, because it's looking like, as of now, our final episode, which is going to be in 2 weeks. I'm on vacation next week. Jordan will be in Nashville, still working. I'm checking out.
Good for you.
So, I was setting you up to say, oh, like I'm the one that works hard.
I
You're the
just got off of
slackers.
vacation. I can't say that.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't going to
I
mention
can't
it.
say that at all.
Oh,
No,
you
man,
took vacation.
it's the off season. You deserve to recharge.
Okay. Well, that wasn't what I was fishing for. I was fishing for a troll comment from you, but you surprised me there. Anyway, so yeah, okay. So we would like to end the season, end the year as we did last year with our listener mailbag. We had a great fun episode last year to end things that sat there in the feed for all holiday season and is our most listened to podcast ever still, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So let's do that again. We would like you to submit questions via email if possible, so I can just kind of keep track of them. My email address is jgluck, JGLUCK, @theathletic.com. Send in your questions, and we will try to do the best ones. We're not going to get to every question. We'll, probably pick, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 or something. We'll try to go a couple hours to send it off in style or something in a couple weeks here. But yeah, that'll be the plan. That'll be the finale of the season. And we can recap if anything fun, exciting happens in Nashville. We can recap that as well. Jordan can fill us in a couple weeks. So until then, Jordan, any final thoughts or anything?
Nope. Great chat with you. I always love doing this, and I look forward to the mailbag. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Great questions.
Yeah, we love
Last year,
seeing your questions. Yeah,
I would expect that we're gonna probably get some good ones this year too.
I hope so. Yeah, you guys have a lot of good things on your mind. And again, I'm not putting this out on Twitter. I'm just trying to make this for our listeners only, which is why I just mentioned it here at the end of the episode. So if you listen this long, you must be one of our true loyal listeners. So send us a question. Again, my email is jgluck, JGLUCK, @theathletic.com. All right, everybody. Well, as always, thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you next time on the Teardown. See you in a couple weeks.